or otherwise? And Jordan, what are some ways maybe we can be involved in the effort to get some of these changes made?
So as far as our victims are concerned, or our survivors at the Wall House, I think one of the ways that we've seen lawyers helpful to us is many of these ladies want to regain custody of their children, and it's been helpful to have lawyers involved to help with that. And if they do have to go to court on charges, we can use assistance in that area. And some of them are looking to have their charges expunged because they now have a fresh start at life, and they want to move forward. And every effort that we put into this, it's worth it. They are worth the rescue. They are worth the restoration efforts. And we have young ladies who are doing amazing things with their lives right now. So, but let Jordan answer the rest of that.
So legislatively, I'm working on getting a piece of legislation through, fingers crossed, this legislative session with Representative Marika Coleman. She's the Assistant Minority Leader for the House Democratic Caucus. The bill would essentially mandate training for all law enforcement agencies. It's going to be a budgetary issue of how can you do that efficiently and get everyone trained at the same time. So we're kind of working on that, but lobbying your local legislators and letting them know that this is a pervasive issue, but that's going to be coming up in the legislative session. And we're also going to look at mandating certifications and trainings for truckers. So I'll be engaging Truckers Against Trafficking, who just had a summit today in Montgomery, and then I'll be engaging the Medical Association to see if we can maybe mandate training for health professionals. New Jersey has done that. And oftentimes a lot of these women, if they're going into the ER, a nurse or a doctor is going to be the first line. It's not going to be a law enforcement agent. So they can really identify some of these victims in outside of the law enforcement arena, and they can perhaps get information easier because they're not a law enforcement officer, and they would happen across these victims in their daily work. So just kind of...
Let me interrupt you there. Jack and I were on Fox this morning promoting this program, and Pam asked me a question that I could not answer very well, that I would love to hear from y'all the answer. What do y'all train these professionals, and what should we as laymen be on the lookout at truck stops or convenience stores or wherever this is happening, that hey, I'm alerted to the fact that this might be a victim that I need to pay attention to?
I would say from an education standpoint, if you go to dhs.gov/Blue Campaign, all of the resources that we use typically to train law enforcement, first responders, the NGO community, all of those resources are at dhs.gov/Blue Campaign. I can also provide you all kinds of material. So I'm the coordinator for the Blue Campaign here in Alabama, so I can get you stuff that you can carry with you in terms of indicator cards and that kind of thing. That will give you those signs to be on the lookout for if you're at a truck stop or a restaurant or wherever human trafficking takes place. And it's because it's everywhere. I would say that every single person in this room at one time or another has benefited from human trafficking. You may not have benefited from sex trafficking, but you have benefited from human trafficking, and that you have benefited from labor trafficking. I can guarantee it. I have, all of us have. We may not have realized it at the time, but we benefit from it because it's so pervasive and it's everywhere. Once you begin to recognize those signs, then you can report it.
Could you give us an example of how labor trafficking occurs? What happens? Who's doing it? Where do they do it?
The hospitality industry, domestic servitudes and domestic servants, oftentimes. It happens in the restaurant industry quite a bit. It happens in agriculture, manufacturing. Those are all all industries in which, and some service industries, nail salons, for
Would there be
instance.
somebody who puts them there and gets
Typically,
paid for it?
yes, so typically what happens is, a lot of these people, most often, but not always, most often, they're foreign nationals. But not always. And I repeat, not always. People that look just like you and me can be victims of labor trafficking here in the United States. But most often, they're foreign nationals, they're vulnerable populations, and they're taken advantage of. They may come into the United States for the promise of employment, whatever the case might be, only to end up doing something that they didn't come here for. And it could be, again, working in the kitchen of a restaurant, could be working in a nail salon, could be working in some type of a hazardous industry, a massage parlor, whatever the case might be. These victims are forced to work for little or no pay. Oftentimes they are paying off a debt to maybe a smuggler or to a corrupt attorney overseas, or whoever helped them do their paperwork, whatever the case might be. All these different folks involved in a scheme, and the fact is they're never going to get out of debt, because typically what happens, especially in agriculture and manufacturing and service industries and that kind of thing, where they're under the more direct control of the person who's actually trafficking them. Every time they screw up, if they break something, if they fail to meet a quota, if they call in sick, if they don't like what they wore to work that day, whatever the case might be, they add fines and penalties on top of what they already owe. And there's no contract, so they can just say, well, you know what? Yesterday your bill was $20,000. Today, because you missed your quota yesterday, now your bill is back up to $30,000. And it's not uncommon for us to see people who have paid $60,000 to travel to the United States and thinking that they're coming here legally or whatnot, only to find out that they're now the victim of a human trafficking scheme.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for this event. Thank you, Mr. Jordan. I feel with them as a survivor of human trafficking. My name is Esperance Taylor. I am a victim of forced labor here in Birmingham, Alabama. Thank you, Mr. Doug. I wish if I met you when I pressed my case with Homeland Security that time. They were not ready, and have been lucky to escape, which is a true miracle. Now, as a survivor, become my own advocate. I hope that my own voice, me too, will be heard for a change. Thank you so much. Thank you, Caroline. I have been at the Well House when was one party there. Thank you so much.
So, thanks so much for those words, and just speaking to that, because HSI...
Sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you so much for speaking to that. And I wanted to speak more to that type of situation. I know that you deal with foreign nationals and sex and human trafficking situations. What are some ways, if we know someone or have a client who's in that type of situation, to induce them perhaps to help testify? Because I'm sure a lot of them are scared to talk to law enforcement, or I know there's some avenues.
Oh yeah, definitely. So, if you've heard me give this presentation before, don't answer, or talk about this before, but do any of you know when the very first immigration law was written in the United States? 1875. It's called the Page Act. Little known fact, the very first immigration law in the United States was also the very first human trafficking law. They were one and the same. The Page Act, written just 10 years after the end of slavery in the United States, was a law that made it illegal to import, maybe not the best choice of words today, but to import women into the United States for immoral purposes. And it also made it illegal to import people into the United States essentially for forced labor. So we've been dealing with this now for 144 years. And have had a chance with different iterations and edits of the law and that type of thing to get better and better at what we do and how we work with victims and avenues that we can provide support. So, and despite what you hear about the Department of Homeland Security, despite what you might hear about Immigration and Customs Enforcement or Homeland Security investigations, I'm here to tell you, we do not deport victims. Did everybody hear me? Yes. We do not deport victims of human trafficking. We take a victim-centered approach to those that we deal with. And I will tell you that it is our position that it doesn't matter the color of your skin, it doesn't matter where you came from, whether from inside the United States or outside of the United States. We were all created in the image of God, and nobody deserves to be exploited. That's our position. So we have avenues that we can use to help protect victims, especially foreign nationals who are victims of human trafficking. Even if that person is here in the United States illegally. They crossed the border illegally, they came in through some other illegal means. If they have no status here in the United States whatsoever, we can protect that person. So we are the one agency in the federal government, the only agency in the federal government that can issue continuing presence to a person that's otherwise unlawfully here in the United States. Continuing presence is a 2-year benefit that we can provide a trafficking victim. It's renewable every 2 years that allows that person to stay in the United States to help with the prosecution, to receive care and that type of thing. We can provide that person an EAD, an employment authorization document, that allows them to get a Social Security card and obtain a job while they have that legal status here in the United States. We can also then help that person obtain a T visa, a trafficking visa. There are other forms of visas that we can use too, a U visa for victims of other forms of crime, or an S visa for a witness to a crime, that type of thing. But we can help them obtain that benefit to remain in the United States. We have trafficking victims who have obtained those benefits that have gone on to, they get their lawful permanent residency status, aka a green card, here in the United States, and have even gone on to become naturalized U.S. citizens. So that's one of the main ways. If you are an attorney and you have a victim, a true victim of human trafficking, and you can get us engaged, get law enforcement engaged to certify that that victim is truly a victim of human trafficking, there's a lot that we can do to help that person with their case, and hopefully, they can help us as well to bring the perpetrators, those responsible for their plight, to justice.
Okay, so I'd like to add something to that, just kind of a human interest story. I've heard Doug tell this, but it hasn't set with me as much as it did tonight, because I hear things on TV about Homeland Security and ICE, and I'm like, no, these are good guys. So let me tell you the story. It involves Doug and Tuscaloosa and the Well House. There was a young lady who was trafficked to the U.S., thought she was coming here to work, I believe. Am I correct,
Yep.
Doug? And was trafficked in other states, ended up in Tuscaloosa, didn't know where she was. And when they were able to do the rescue and meet with her, she hadn't eaten in 3 days. She ended up at the Well House, and I see her pretty face right now. And every week, almost every week, one of Doug's fellows, if I got this correct, he's yours, right, Brian?
Yes.
Would come to the Well House and meet with her. And they worked with her until they were able to get the continuing presence. We were able to allow her to talk with her family back in her native country. And she didn't want to leave. She did not want to leave the U.S. There were moments of frustration, language barrier and so forth, but it was a true team effort between Tuscaloosa, Homeland, and what we were able to do with the Well House. And a few months ago, she graduated from the Well House. I mean, she completed the program, and the Homeland Security representative, her person who worked with her, surprised her at her graduation, and there were lots of tears, and you know, it was just a true success story. And she's still here and still doing well, so this works.
I think that's a great way to end this part of the presentation. We can open it up for a few questions. I think we have time. Those you guys have already asked a lot of the questions I had left, but if anyone else has more questions.
I would like to say to the group of lawyers, so I'm planning to go and visit the Well House. Carolyn has said so graciously that I can come on a Saturday. I would love for any of y'all that want to get involved to let me know and try to come with me as well. And we will be sitting down and talking about the resources that she's already using legally and the resources that she may not be aware of legally. So we can plug in lawyers to help these victims in some of the ways that we've heard described tonight. So I'll be the conduit for that. If y'all want to be involved with that on another level, let me know, and then that will be our next step as far as this group goes.
Great, and I think also in your CLE materials, there's some helpful information. I know there's some creative ways lawyers in the community are going after the financial proceeds of human trafficking. I think using RICO, maybe some other civil statutes to go after, for example, hotels or other places that may benefit from the proceeds of human trafficking, and that would be in your CLE materials.
There is a state statute you can go under also.
Great, I wouldn't be familiar with that, but if you could speak to it, feel free.
Yes, there's a state civil statute where you can sue the person and get damages, and there's treble damages, and you get attorney's fees just as you would under the civil rights statutes. And you can bring those civil lawsuits under that state statute, and it's the Marika Coleman, and I forget the other name, human trafficking statute.
Jack
It provides
Williams.
for a civil cause of action.
So just to clarify, on behalf of the victim against a human trafficker.
Against the person.
And I actually drafted a pleading, which is in one of my books for Thomson Reuters, but it's in the materials, based on that statute, for you to go by and get punitive damages and wipe somebody out. And it's in the CLE material.
I don't know if pro bono is a bad word in this room. But, I mean, when you think about trafficking victims, they don't have anything. They really can't help to pay what typical legal fees, would be, or a retainer. But, I mean, think about why you got involved in the legal profession to begin with, and think about the justice that you're doing for that victim. If you could spend the hours to help that victim gain that civil restitution, to get their life back on track. I mean, to me, what's more rewarding than helping someone that can't otherwise help themselves.
Do we have time for You've
quickly.
joined us.
This is probably more of a local law enforcement issue, but for this to be going on in the volume that it is, there have to be so many customers who have no fear of prosecution or stigma or anything. Are there barriers to you pursuing the customers, Johns, whatever you want to call them? There have to be so many.
Even the traffickers still, my trafficker is still on dating apps right now with his face pictures connected to his social media Facebook account. So I've run across him on multiple occasions. So he still feels very empowered and safe. And I mean, I've talked with him about trafficking before on one of the dating sites. So he's like, it is such a pervasive issue, and it's so big, and there's so very little being done on the grand scale. When you look at how huge it is, they feel really kind of fearless because they haven't been prosecuted, and it's hard to prosecute them sometimes. It's really difficult, so that's my experience with that.
Yeah, and I would say what Tuscaloosa's doing in terms of targeting the Johns, and I think there's a push right now to actually to increase penalties, because the reason there's a problem is because there's a demand. So if we can eliminate the demand, or at least make it so risky that people are adverse to taking that risk because they believe that they're going to get caught, and they're going to pay hefty fines, they're going to lose their vehicle, and in some jurisdictions, in some states, if you're caught with in any type of a human trafficking sting or whatnot, and they seize your car, how do you explain that when you get home? So we've got to continue to address the demand. We're working with local law enforcement here in Birmingham to educate them. We're now training, and there's some material up here that talks a little bit about that. We're now training every single recruit that comes to the Birmingham Police Academy. They're getting 8 hours of human trafficking training. We're training every law enforcement officer in Jefferson County. So there's a push now, and there's an appetite for law enforcement to learn more so that they can more efficiently and more effectively do more.
Back when I was a working man, I remember we had cases, most of these, they would travel. They don't stay in one place a very long time for a good reason. Is there any sort of national clearinghouse for information to kind of tie things together? FBI used to have a program where all bank robbery information from all across the country would go in one central repository, so traveling bank robbers could be identified. Is there anything like that for this?
So there is. So there's an organization called the Polaris Project, based in Washington, D.C., that does a lot of research and a lot of statistical analysis on human trafficking. They create a lot of heat maps that show where the trends are, where human trafficking is most prevalent. You can go to the Polaris Project website and look at the state of Alabama, for instance, and see where the hotspots are, and some of those hotspots might surprise you. We now have other law enforcement sensitive tools that we use, in which if we encounter someone that we believe is a victim, we can enter their phone number, we can enter their email address, we can take a picture and upload a picture of them into this computer program. And if that phone number, photo, email address has ever been used in ads anywhere else in the United States, it's going to show us exactly where. So we can say, if we encounter a person that has never done this outside of Birmingham, and does it in one local neighborhood, there might be some other factors in play, but if we find a person who has been in Atlanta and Montgomery and Birmingham and Chattanooga and Nashville and Memphis, and Dallas and back to Birmingham, well, that's a good indicator, that's an excellent indicator that person is being trafficked. So we do have those tools and resources. Today we're getting much better at intelligence gathering. One of the things that I think has been a benefit to law enforcement over the last, since 2001. We've spent the last, since 2001 in war. We've doing a lot of work in the counterterrorism field, and we've taken a lot of those same lessons that we've used from conducting intelligence operations, from national security and counterterrorism, and using those same lessons and those same tools and applying those things to things like human trafficking. So we're getting better.
And just speaking quickly to that, as far as a prosecutorial perspective, jumping from the investigation to being able to prosecute those cases is often very tough. I mean, we wish we could prosecute more. The problem is, you need a victim who's willing to testify, who's willing to say, yes, I was trafficked, and willing to testify against someone they probably were terrified of, to be in a stable place, to not have run away again, to not be back on the street, back on drugs. If we have one in the well house, it's a dream, because that is the ideal situation. But if that victim is an adult, they need to have been coerced, and that requires testimony, extensive testimony of their coercion. So it's often very hard.
Thank you, panel.